Nthabiseng Ngoepe is pastor, author and motivational speaker who's recently released her debut book titled The Mending of a Broken Vessel. Based on Ngoepe's personal journey, this book explores themes such as suicide, abortion, divorce, marriage and salvation by tapping into the reality pain on one's life. And to speak to us more about this offering and how she's now turning her wounds and painful experience into positively touching the lives of others, Nthabiseng Ngoepe is joining us now via Zoom. A very good morning to you, Nthabi. Thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Simphiwe. Thank you for having me. Good morning, viewers at home.
Nthabiseng, you say that you had absolutely no desire whatsoever to pen down a book, and yet here we are. Speak to us about how this book was born.
This book is, I always say to people, this is the product of God. It was not at all in my plans. And as cliche as it may sound, a servant of God said to me that God wants you to write a book. And when I prayed about it, it was confirmed in my spirit. So naturally, I doubted what I had to say in the book. Because, you know, when you live life, you don't think you have anything to say. You don't think you have any story to tell. And that was my own inclination as well. So I had reservations in terms of writing the book, but I did it nonetheless. And here we are. The book is doing very well, and it surprises even my own expectations.
Now, just briefly take us through what this book is all about and what the significance behind the title, The Mending of a Broken Vessel, is.
This book chronicles story of my life. It takes the reader through the journey of things that I endured from my teenage years when I experienced the breakdown of my own parents' marriage, which set me on a commotion of a life full of consequences and wrong choices, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
I, as a result, was set off track in my own life. I lost my own sense of identity in that. And I was set on a quest of seeking love, seeking home, seeking a place of acceptance. I got involved in relationships fairly young, I believe, as a result of that quest. And I ended up being pregnant as a teenager, ended up trying to commit suicide, attempting that 3 times, surviving that nonetheless by the grace of God. And it takes one through the journey of my failed first marriage, which had its ups and downs, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, my attempts to recover from that. When I went back into the dating circle after my divorce, what I experienced to be a jungle out there as a single mother trying to date with 2 kids. And then it takes one through how God really just graced me and enabled me to meet a partner later on in life that was able to embrace me for who I was. It takes one through the journey of my unemployment as well, which sort of pushed me to the 3rd attempt of taking my life, and how I survived that as well. It's a story that chronicles divorce, it chronicles alcoholism, it chronicles financial abuse, it chronicles my journey into salvation, how I was viewed by the church because of my divorce status, how I was received by community, because when I met my current husband as well, the circumstances were also not ideal. So it really just takes the reader through the journey of my life. And I believe that it shows as well how broken a life I led. And that is why I titled the book, The Mending of a Broken Vessel. Yeah. In essence, the title came from my spirit. I believe God gave me that title. I didn't just, phantom it. I got it from God. And indeed, it is befitting of the life that I led as a broken vessel who has now been crafted and made whole by God so that others can benefit from my life.
And that broken vessel, Nthabiseng, I suppose, also touches on divorce, which you just mentioned earlier on. And divorce is also another topic that features quite prominently in this book. And it's the wounds and the stigma attached to divorce, especially within the church spaces. Speak to us more about this.
True, very true. You know, we tend to be judgmental. When we sit and speak in the church, we are quick to quote scriptures and say that God hates divorce, which is very accurate. It is biblical. Yet we are not trained as the church, even as individuals within the church, to be awakened to the reality that is life. I believe no one gets married with the intention of getting divorced, but life happens, and it did happen to me. Yet when I stepped into life of salvation, I was not prepared for how the saved, for how those people who know God would view me as a substandard Christian, so to speak. In my observation, I believed that I could not pray, to their satisfaction. I could not be a fulfilled Christian. I could not live a life that pleased God, simply because life had happened and I had decided to get out of that marriage. Now, people often ask me, are you pro-divorce or are you not? And they often construe the book to be a book that advocates for divorce. And to that I answer, circumstances vary. Am I for divorce? Yes and no. Marriage is supposed to be an institution simply where one flourishes, where one gets companionship, you get love, you get growth in your individual person as well as the union. When such does not happen in an institution, when such an institution degrades you and makes you into a person who questions even yourself, even your confidence, and it poses a risk to your own safety. When one reads my book, you will realize that I was in a situation where I slept with the firearm in my bed. In such instances, one ought to be wise and realize that my safety and my life must come first. And to that, God does not condemn. God has called us to a life of love. He has called us to a life of peace. And my greatest desire is that the church could reflect on how it views the divorcees and the stigma attached to it. Society as a whole as well. Because there's a great respect attached to the married people. But once you step out and you decide to choose a life of safety for yourself, then you become a person who is subjected to scrutiny and to judgment. Yes. Sadly so.
Nthabiseng, I've got so much confidence that your testimony will definitely build so much lives. I'm inspired already, and I'm quite fascinated by how you rose above your challenges and your problems, and you came to the realization to realize that there's more to your problems, and you definitely can live a fulfilled life. And some people may associate suicide attempts, or even suicidal thoughts to depression. But then there was that glimmer of hope that befell you. So what inspired that glimmer of hope for you to decide that, you can live a much more fruitful and fulfilled life? And you might as well just talk to us about your healing journey, how it began and where you are currently.
I firstly realized a lot of support. We must be sympathetic, empathetic, and supportive to those who are in such situations. I got a lot of support from my family. Firstly, I was made to realize that my first marriage was not everything. I realized when I first attempted to commit suicide that seeking love from someone who was not prepared to love me, it was not everything. I looked at my young daughter at the time, and I was 17, I believe, at the time when I attempted to first commit suicide. And I thought, should I leave this young life behind? What is going to happen of this young baby that I brought into the world? So I got a bit of self-motivation, so to speak, but it was encouraged by the support that I had around me. My parents made sure that I am reaffirmed in the knowledge of who I was. At the time, I didn't know Christ. There was no time simply way to motivate myself in the way. That only came about, actually, in my third attempt of suicide. Now, I want to speak to those people who are going through this journey and say to them that, firstly, there is hope. When your identity is not entrenched in your problems, when you start seeing life beyond your problems, and this is the significance simply of speaking to other people. When you don't speak to people, your situation seems like the biggest hole that you can actually be in, and you see no way out except taking your life. My healing came from, firstly, acknowledging that God has a purpose for me. When I started knowing him, I started realizing that Christ died for me. I started realizing that there is a bigger picture here besides my being alive. I have to touch lives.
Yes.
I have to make an impact. And when I take my life, what vacuum, what role am I leaving for the next generation that would be untapped into? I could be transforming lives,
Yes.
and I believe that that is partly what the book is doing. In terms of healing, forgiveness was a critical aspect of that. Because when I started realizing that I cannot blame myself for choices that I made as a teenager. At times, you cannot get over what you did. Decisions haunt you, and they haunt you even into your adult years. So I started forgiving myself, firstly. I started forgiving those I thought wronged me. Sometimes we are quick to play the victim, but we don't realize that it takes two to tango. Some situations we get ourselves involved in. What
Pastor
we
Nthabiseng,
must learn to do.
Pastor, I know that you definitely will touch lives, and this book will definitely touch lives. Thank you so much for chatting to us. I wish we had more time, and I quite like the fact that you say that those who read the book will read about themselves, because so many people can actually relate to, your testimony. Thank you so much for joining us, Pastor Nthabiseng.